The moment I found the lipstick stain on his shirt, my world should have crumbled. Instead, I felt an almost eerie calm settle over me. The vibrant red smudge, so different from the soft pinks I wore, was proof of what I'd suspected for weeks. Matt was cheating on me. It wasn't just the lipstick. There were the late nights at the office, the sudden need to keep his phone password protected, and the way he stopped looking at me when he thought I wasn't watching. I had been bracing for this revelation like a storm I couldn't outrun. And now it was here, but rather than scream or cry, I felt free. For years, I had played the role of the perfect wife. I supported his career, kept our home immaculate, and hosted dinner parties that left his colleagues singing my praises. I was the calm in his chaos, the one who remembered anniversaries and smoothed over his temperamental tendencies. But beneath it all, there was a nagging emptiness I couldn't quite name. His betrayal didn't shatter me. It clarified everything. That night, as Matt slept soundly beside me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him or fall apart. I was going to orchestrate the perfect divorce. The first step was preparation. I spent weeks quietly gathering information. Financial records, copies of our joint investments, and a list of assets. I even reached out to a divorce lawyer, Vanessa Parks, whose reputation for finesse and discretion preceded her. She listened intently as I explained my situation, her sharp eyes flickering with admiration. "You don't want revenge," she said, leaning back in her chair. "You want freedom. And you're smart enough to make sure it's on your terms." Exactly. I didn't want to fight or expose Matt's infidelity to the world. What I wanted was a clean slate for both of us. I wasn't naive enough to think we could part as friends, but I saw no reason to let bitterness poison what was left of our relationship. The second step was playing the part. I went about my days as if nothing had changed. I laughed at his jokes over dinner, kissed him goodbye before he left for work, and even initiated date nights. If Matt felt guilty, he didn't show it. He was either too confident in his ability to deceive me or too wrapped up in his affair to notice the subtle ways I was reclaiming control. At the same time, I started building a life without him. I applied for a marketing position at a firm downtown, a job I would have never considered when I was too busy managing his life. I signed up for a pottery class and started spending time with friends I had neglected for years. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again, not just the wife he expected me to be. The day I handed him the divorce papers was unforgettable. I waited until we were sitting on the patio, sipping coffee on a rare Sunday morning we both had free. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were just starting to turn. It was the kind of morning that begged for honesty. "Matt," I said, setting my mug down, "we need to talk." He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing. "What's up?" "I know about her." I kept my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. "And I've known for a while." His face went pale, and for a moment, he looked like he might deny it. But then his shoulders slumped and he sighed. "Emily, I held up a hand. "Don't. This isn't about blame or excuses. I'm not here to yell or ask for an explanation. I just want us to move forward in a way that makes sense for both of us." I slid the envelope with the divorce papers across the table. He stared at it like it was a bomb about to detonate. "You've been unhappy," I continued. "And honestly, so have I. I think it's time we stop pretending and figure out how to let each other go." For a long time he didn't say anything. Then, to my surprise, he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. I don't want a divorce." I hadn't expected him to fight for me. In all my planning, I'd envisioned him agreeing out of guilt or even relief. But Matt wasn't ready to let go. Over the next few weeks, he did everything he could to convince me to stay. He canceled late nights, deleted social media accounts, and even suggested couples therapy. At first, I thought it was just desperation, an attempt to save face. But then he started showing up in ways that felt real. He listened when I spoke, made an effort to be present, and even apologized for things I didn't think he was capable of acknowledging. Part of me wanted to believe him. After all, we had built a life together. There were good memories mixed in with the disappointments, and I wondered if maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But the more he tried, the clearer it became that I was already gone. His love now felt like an afterthought, a reaction to losing control rather than a genuine desire to build something new. In the end, the divorce was as amicable as I had hoped. We divided our assets fairly, sold the house, and agreed to joint custody of our dog, Bailey. Matt moved into a downtown apartment, and I rented a cozy cottage on the edge of town. It wasn't the fairy tale ending I once imagined, but it was honest. And that felt like enough. Every now and then, Matt texts me. Sometimes it's about Bailey, other times it's just to say he's thinking of me. I respond politely but keep my distance. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm also not interested in looking back. The divorce wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time in a long time, I was free to be exactly who I wanted to be. And that, I realized, was the most perfect ending of all. Life after the divorce unfolded like a sunrise after a long, suffocating night. At first, the transition was disorienting. I would wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear Matt's breathing beside me, only to find my bed empty except for Bailey curled up at my feet. The silence was unnerving, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts. I threw myself into my new job at the marketing firm. It was challenging in ways that excited me, forcing me to adapt and grow. My colleagues were sharp, creative, and surprisingly welcoming. It didn't take long before I started to feel like I belonged. My boss, Jessica, was a powerhouse, a woman who managed to be both intimidating and inspiring. She pulled me into her office one afternoon, a knowing smile on her face. "You're good at this, Emily," she said, handing me a stack of campaign reports. "Better than you think. Don't sell yourself short." It was a small comment, but it stuck with me. For years, I had let myself be overshadowed by Matt's ambitions, convincing myself that supporting him was enough. Now, I was realizing that I had ambitions of my own, and they were worth pursuing. The pottery class became another unexpected source of joy. At first, I signed up just to fill the empty hours in my evenings. But as my hands shaped the clay, smoothing and molding it into something tangible, I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. There was something profoundly satisfying about creating something from nothing, something that was entirely mine. It was in that class that I met Rachel. She was in her late 30s, with a quick wit and a laugh that filled the studio. We bonded over our shared awkwardness with the pottery wheel and quickly became friends. Rachel had been through her own divorce a few years earlier and had a perspective that I found both comforting and empowering. "One thing they don't tell you about divorce," she said one evening as we sipped wine after class, "is how much it teaches you about yourself. It's like shedding a skin you didn't even know was there." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The divorce hadn't just ended my marriage. It had peeled back layers of who I was, exposing parts of myself I hadn't seen in years, or maybe ever. Matt, meanwhile, was still trying to keep a foothold in my life. At first, his attempts were subtle. A text here, a casual suggestion that we grab coffee there. But when I kept politely declining, he started showing up unannounced. One Saturday morning, I found him on my doorstep, holding a box of pastries and looking disarmingly boyish. "I just wanted to talk," he said, handing me the box.
Canuno comein.
Against my better judgment, I let him. We sat at the kitchen table, the box of pastries untouched between us. Matt looked at me with an intensity that made me uneasy, like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. "I miss you, Em," he said finally. "I know I messed up. I was selfish and stupid, and I took you for granted. But I'm different now. I see things clearly, and I want to make it right." His words stirred something in me, but it wasn't what he hoped for. I felt sadness, not for him, but for the version of myself who would have clung to those words like a lifeline. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love, real love, couldn't be built on apologies and promises alone. "I appreciate that, Matt," I said gently. "But I think we're past the point of fixing this. I've moved on, and I think you should too." His face fell, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, a look of resignation settling over him. That was the last time he tried to win me back. As the months passed, my life began to take on a rhythm that felt natural and fulfilling. I threw a housewarming party at the cottage, inviting friends old and new. Rachel came, along with a few colleagues from work and some neighbors I had started to get to know. The house was filled with laughter and the smell of fresh-baked bread. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. There were other changes, too. I started running in the mornings, a habit I picked up during the divorce as a way to clear my head. It became a form of meditation, each step grounding me in the present. On weekends, I explored the hiking trails around town, often bringing Bailey along. She seemed as happy with our new life as I was, bounding ahead on the trails and wagging her tail as if to say, "This is where we belong." One day, during a particularly hectic week at work, Jessica pulled me aside with a conspiratorial grin. "How do you feel about a promotion?" she asked. I blinked, caught off guard. "A promotion? You've been killing it lately," she said. "I think it's time we gave you more responsibility and a bigger paycheck to match. What do you say?" I said yes, of course. The promotion came with longer hours, but I didn't mind. I loved the work and I loved the person I was becoming because of it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living a life that was entirely mine. As I settled into my new role at work and my new life outside of it, I started to think about dating again. It wasn't a decision I took lightly. The thought of opening myself up to someone new was both exciting and terrifying. But I knew I was ready. I signed up for a dating app, half expecting it to be a disaster. To my surprise, it wasn't. I went on a few dates, some forgettable, others surprisingly enjoyable. One man, a history professor named Andrew, stood out. He was kind, intelligent, and had a dry sense of humor that kept me laughing through our entire first date. We started seeing each other regularly, and while it was still early days, there was a warmth and ease to our connection that felt different from anything I'd experienced before. He didn't try to overshadow me or fit me into a mold. He just saw me exactly as I was, and that was enough. Looking back, I sometimes marvel at how far I've come. The woman who sat on that patio with divorce papers in hand feels like a distant memory, though I carry her strength with me every day. The divorce wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one, a better one, and for that I will always be grateful. Andrew and I grew closer with each passing month. He was patient and steady, never pushing me to move faster than I was ready for. On weekends, we'd explore bookstores, share lazy breakfasts at my cottage, or take Bailey on long walks by the lake. He had a quiet way of making me feel seen and appreciated, not for what I could do for him but simply for who I was. One rainy evening, as we sat by the fireplace with glasses of wine, Andrew turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he said, his voice soft. "There's a strength in you that's inspiring." I smiled, though his words touched a part of me I hadn't let anyone see in years. "It didn't always feel that way," I admitted. "There was a time when I didn't think I'd ever get here." "Well," he said, raising his glass to mine, "here you are. And it's beautiful to watch." It was moments like that, simple, genuine, unhurried, that made me realize how much I had grown. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Work, too, became a cornerstone of my new identity. With the promotion came more responsibility, and I thrived under the challenge. Jessica started bringing me into high-level meetings, trusting me to pitch ideas and lead projects. One particularly ambitious campaign, a rebranding effort for a struggling client, became my pet project. I threw myself into it, spending late nights at the office and obsessing over every detail. When the campaign launched and exceeded all expectations, Jessica called me into her office. "This," she said, holding up a printed copy of our glowing results, "is what leadership looks like. You've got the talent, Emily, and the drive. Have you ever thought about running your own team?" The idea both thrilled and terrified me. But as I sat there staring at the woman I had become, confident, capable, and self-assured, I realized that I was ready. Ready to take risks, to keep growing, to keep pushing myself. "Yes," I said finally, a smile spreading across my face. "I have." Meanwhile, my friendship with Rachel deepened. She became my sounding board, my cheerleader, and on occasion my partner in crime. We started a tradition of monthly girls' nights, where we'd drink too much wine, vent about our lives, and laugh until our sides hurt. Rachel's no-nonsense attitude balanced my more introspective tendencies, and I found her perspective invaluable. One night, as we sat on my porch under a sky full of stars, Rachel turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Okay, spill it," she said. "What's the deal with Andrew? Are you falling for him or what?" I laughed, but her question caught me off guard. I sipped my wine, stalling. "I don't know," I said honestly. "He's wonderful. Kind, thoughtful, funny. But I guess part of me is still scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not ready? Rachel rolled her eyes. Emily, you're ready. Trust me. You've done the work, you've found yourself again. You're allowed to be happy. Hell, you deserve to be happy. Her words stayed with me long after she left that night. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to let myself believe in the possibility of something new. One crisp autumn afternoon, Andrew surprised me with a day trip to a vineyard just outside the city. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of ripe grapes, and the rolling hills stretched out before us like a painting. We wandered through the rows of vines, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing. As the sun began to set, casting the landscape in hues of gold and orange, Andrew took my hand. I've been thinking, he said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. About us. My heart skipped a beat. What about us? I know you've been through a lot, he said, his eyes searching mine. And I never want to rush you or push you into something you're not ready for. But I need you to know. I'm all in. Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I'm here for it. For you. For a moment I couldn't speak. His honesty, his vulnerability. It was everything I hadn't realized I needed to hear. And in that moment I knew. I was ready to take the leap. I'm all in too, I said, my voice steady. With you. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth and joy. Andrew and I grew closer, our relationship deepening in ways that felt effortless and right. Work continued to challenge and excite me, and I started mentoring younger colleagues, sharing the lessons I had learned along the way. But the biggest transformation was within myself. The woman I saw in the mirror each morning was no longer defined by her past. She was strong, independent, and unafraid to dream big. I had built a life I loved. A life that was entirely my own. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I found myself standing on the deck of my cottage, watching the sun set over the lake. Bailey sat at my feet, her tail thumping softly against the wood. Andrew was inside, putting the finishing touches on dinner. The smell of roasted garlic wafted through the open door, mingling with the crisp evening air. As I stood there, taking it all in, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the pain that had pushed me to grow. For the strength that had carried me through. And for the joy that had found me on the other side. Life wasn't perfect. Never would be. But it was real and it was mine. And that, I realized, was more than enough. As I stood there on the deck, watching the lake shimmer under the fading light, my mind drifted to all the moments that had brought me here. It felt like a lifetime ago that I'd sat across from Matt, sliding those divorce papers across the table. That version of me, unsure, afraid but determined, had no idea what was waiting on the other side of her courage. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Every step, every decision, every tear shed in private had led me to a life that felt fuller, richer, and more honest than anything I had imagined. Dinner with Andrew that night was, as always, a blend of warmth and laughter. He had a knack for making even the simplest moments feel special. As we cleared the table, he caught my wrist and pulled me close, his eyes searching mine. Do you realize how amazing you are? He asked, his voice soft but steady. I laughed, brushing off the compliment. I'm just me, Andrew. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. You're so much more than that. And I'm lucky to have you. His words filled me with a quiet joy. For so long I had felt invisible in my marriage, seen only in the ways that served someone else's needs. But with Andrew I felt truly seen. And more importantly, I felt seen for who I was, not who I was expected to be. Over the next several months, life continued to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. My work at the marketing firm grew more rewarding, and the rebranding campaign I had spearheaded earned industry recognition. Jessica, true to her word, gave me the opportunity to lead my own team. It was a challenge I embraced wholeheartedly, and I found myself thriving in the role. Mentoring younger team members became one of my favorite parts of the job. Seeing their excitement, their creativity, and their hunger to learn reminded me of the journey I'd taken to get here. I made it a point to encourage them the way Jessica had encouraged me, to remind them of their worth even when they doubted themselves. Rachel, as always, remained a constant source of support and humor. Our girls' nights became a ritual we both cherished, a chance to unwind and remind each other of how far we'd come. One night, over yet another bottle of wine, she looked at me with a mischievous grin. So, she said, swirling her glass, When are you going to marry Andrew? I nearly choked on my sip of wine. Marry him? Rachel, we've only been dating for a year. She raised an eyebrow. And? You're crazy about him. He's crazy about you. What's the holdup? I laughed, shaking my head. It's not that simple. Marriage is a big step. I've been there before, remember? Rachel leaned forward, her expression softening. Yeah, but this isn't before. And Andrew isn't Matt. You don't have to rush, but don't let fear hold you back either. Her words stayed with me long after she left that night. I wasn't afraid of Andrew, far from it. But the idea of marriage brought with it a flood of memories, some good, some painful. I knew that if I ever took that step again, it would have to be on my own terms for the right reasons. Andrew, for his part, never pressured me. He seemed content to let our relationship unfold naturally, allowing us both the space to grow together. But as our one-year anniversary approached, I noticed a shift in him. A quiet anticipation, as if he was waiting for the right moment to say something important. It happened one evening during a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains. The air was crisp and cool, the stars brighter than I had ever seen. We were sitting by the fire, Bailey snoozing at our feet, when Andrew reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. Andrew! He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a single diamond. It wasn't flashy or extravagant. It was understated and elegant, much like Andrew himself. I know you've been through a lot, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I know marriage isn't something you take lightly. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. No pressure, no rush. I just want you to know how I feel. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. For a long moment, I didn't say anything, letting his words settle over me like a warm blanket. Finally, I smiled. Andrew, I love you. And I think I'm ready to take this step with you. His face lit up, and he slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a moment of pure joy, untainted by fear or doubt. For the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping into something not because I had to, but because I truly wanted to. The months that followed were a blur of planning, celebration, and quiet anticipation. Andrew and I decided on a small, intimate wedding. Just close friends and family, nothing extravagant. Rachel, of course, was my maid of honor, and she took her role very seriously, making sure every detail was perfect. On the day of the wedding, as I stood in front of the mirror in my simple yet elegant dress, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't the wide-eyed optimism I had felt on my first wedding day. It was something deeper, an understanding of what love truly meant, of the work it required and the joy it could bring. When I walked down the aisle and saw Andrew waiting for me, his eyes filled with love, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The years that followed were filled with more joys than I could have ever imagined. Andrew and I built a life together that was rich and fulfilling, rooted in mutual respect and unwavering support. My career continued to flourish, and I eventually started my own marketing consultancy, a venture that gave me the freedom to work on projects I was passionate about. Rachel remained a constant in my life, her friendship a reminder of the strength and resilience that had brought me this far. And Bailey, ever faithful, grew older but no less beloved, her presence a source of comfort and companionship. Looking back, I often marveled at how far I had come. The divorce that once felt like the end of everything had, in reality, been the beginning of something extraordinary. It had forced me to confront myself, to grow, and to embrace the life I truly deserved. And for that, I would always be grateful. Starting my own marketing consultancy was a leap of faith, but it turned out to be one of the most rewarding decisions I ever made. I had built enough experience and reputation in the industry to draw clients who trusted my vision. I loved the freedom of choosing the projects I worked on and collaborating with people whose energy matched mine. One of my first clients was a local nonprofit organization working to improve literacy rates among underserved communities. It was a cause close to my heart, and I poured my soul into the campaign. The results were incredible. Funding skyrocketed, and the nonprofit was able to expand its programs to reach more families. The campaign's success caught the attention of a national publication, and they reached out for an interview. Seeing my name in print, my story shared with others, was surreal. It was a moment of validation, not just for my work, but for the person I had become. As my consultancy grew, I hired a small team of talented professionals. Mentoring them felt like paying forward the guidance I'd received from Jessica and others who had believed in me. Watching them thrive under my leadership filled me with pride. Marriage with Andrew was unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was better because it was real. We shared our dreams, our fears, our successes, and even our failures. When challenges arose, we faced them together, communicating openly and working through them as partners. Andrew's love for me was steady and unwavering, and it gave me the confidence to be my authentic self. He didn't expect me to shrink myself to fit into his world. Instead, he celebrated my growth and encouraged me to dream even bigger. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I came home feeling frazzled and overwhelmed. Andrew was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He took one look at me, turned off the stove, and pulled me into a hug. "You don't have to do it all," he said softly. "Let me carry some of it with you." It was such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. With Andrew, I never felt alone in anything. He reminded me that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up for each other, day after day. A few years into our marriage, Andrew and I started talking about expanding our family. It was a conversation that came naturally, one born not out of pressure or obligation, but out of a shared desire to build something together. When I found out I was pregnant, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'd spent so much time building my independence and my career that I worried about what this new chapter would mean for me. But Andrew was my rock, as always, reassuring me that we would figure it out together. The day our daughter Lily was born was the most transformative of my life. Holding her tiny, perfect body in my arms, I felt a kind of love I didn't know existed. She became the center of our world, and every decision we made revolved around giving her the best life we could. Parenthood brought its own set of challenges, of course. Sleepless nights, tantrums, and the constant balancing act between work and family tested my patience and stamina in ways I hadn't expected. But it also brought joy and laughter, the kind that filled every corner of our home. Bailey, now an older and slower dog, took to Lily immediately, often curling up next to her crib as if to protect her. Watching the two of them together melted my heart. Rachel remained a steadfast part of my life, her sharp humor and no-nonsense attitude a constant source of grounding. She became Aunt Rachel to Lily, spoiling her with gifts and teaching her how to bake cookies in her tiny, chaotic kitchen. As Rachel pursued her own dreams, including opening a boutique bakery, I became her biggest cheerleader. She often joked that we were each other's life coaches, pushing one another to be braver and bolder. "Can you believe where we are now?" she asked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my porch. 5 years ago, we were sitting here talking about surviving. Now we're thriving. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "We've come so far, haven't we?" "Damn right we have," she said, raising her glass. "Here's to never settling again." One summer evening, years after the divorce, I received a message from Matt. It was short and simple, asking how I was doing. For a moment, I debated whether to respond. But something inside me told me it was time to close that chapter fully. We met for coffee at a small cafe in town. Matt looked older, more worn than I remembered, but there was a softness to him that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "For everything. For how I treated you, for the choices I made. You deserved better." I nodded, feeling no anger, only a quiet sense of closure. "I've forgiven you, Matt. A long time ago." We talked for a while, catching up on our lives. He had remarried and seemed content, though there was an air of wistfulness in his demeanor. As we said goodbye, I felt a sense of peace. The past no longer had any power over me. It was simply a part of my story, one that had led me to where I was now. Years later, as I sat on the porch of our family's new home, watching Lily play in the yard with the rambunctious puppy Andrew had surprised her with, I felt the weight of everything that had brought me to this moment. Life wasn't perfect, but it was rich and meaningful, filled with love, laughter, and a sense of purpose. I often thought about that younger version of myself, the woman who had sat on a patio with divorce papers in her hand, terrified of the unknown. If I could go back and tell her one thing, it would be this: you're stronger than you think. And the life waiting for you on the other side is more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Keep going. And so I did. Every day I kept going, building a life I loved one step at a time. As the years turned into decades, the life I had built became a legacy of resilience, growth, and love. Lily grew up to be a bright, compassionate young woman. Her curiosity and kindness a reflection of the family Andrew and I had nurtured together. Watching her find her way in the world filled me with a pride that was impossible to put into words. Andrew and I grew older side by side, our love evolving into something deeper with each passing year. It wasn't just romance anymore. It was partnership, trust, and the comfort of knowing someone had your back no matter what. We celebrated milestones big and small, from anniversaries and career successes to quiet evenings spent watching the sunset from our porch. Bailey passed away peacefully one autumn morning, surrounded by the family she had always been part of. Her absence left a quiet ache in our hearts, but we honored her memory by adopting another rescue dog, a spirited collie mixed Lily named Max. He brought new energy into our home, reminding us that life was always moving forward. One particularly vivid memory stays with me. It was a crisp spring day, and Andrew and I were hosting a family gathering at our home. Rachel was there, her bakery thriving and her laughter just as infectious as ever. Lily, now an adult, was chatting animatedly with Andrew about her latest career move, her hands gesturing wildly as she explained her ideas. Max raced around the yard with the younger kids in the family, his tail wagging furiously. As I watched this scene unfold, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the perfection of the moment because life was never perfect, but for the fullness of it. I thought back to the woman I had been before the divorce, lost, unsure, clinging to something that wasn't truly hers anymore. And then I thought of everything that had come after. The risks, the heartbreak, the growth, and the joy. If there was one thing life had taught me, it was this: endings weren't failures. They were beginnings in disguise. My divorce had once felt like the end of everything, but it had opened the door to a life I couldn't have imagined. In my later years, I often found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I started writing a memoir, not for fame or recognition, but as a gift for Lily and for myself. It was a way to honor the lessons I had learned and the strength I had discovered within. The final lines of that memoir came to me one quiet morning as I sat by the lake near our home, the same lake where so many of my transformations had unfolded. I am not the woman I was before my divorce, and I will never be her again. But I carry her with me, every step of the way. She was brave enough to take the first step, and because of her I am here. My story is not one of loss. It is one of finding, of rediscovering, of becoming. And for that, I will always be grateful. With that, I close the book, my heart full. Life wasn't perfect. Never would be. But it was mine, and it was more than enough.